Hi everyone, Sal here from Khan Academy, and as some of y'all know, I have released my second book, Brave New Words, about the future of AI in education and work. It's available wherever you might buy your books. But as part of the research for that book, I did some interviews with some fascinating people, which you are about to watch. So today we have Greg Brockman. I'm very excited to have you here, Greg. For those of you who don't know, Greg is the co-founder, chairman, and president of an organization that some folks are talking about these days called OpenAI. And we at Khan Academy have done a little bit with OpenAI as well. And this is very exciting because this is the start of a new podcast, a new live stream, a new thing we're doing called Brave New Words, which is also um, a book that we're working on as well. So, Greg, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's just start, make sure everyone watching and listening has a shared understanding. Tell us a little bit about OpenAI and how you decided to start it and maybe a little bit of where it's gone since then.
Yeah, so, for me, I first got excited about the idea of AI when I read Alan Turing's 1950 paper on the Turing test, which have you read it, Sal?
I haven't read the paper. I'm very familiar with it, but I had not actually
Yeah.
read the paper.
Okay, so I recommend reading it because, the first half is all about the Turing test, but the second half is about how are you going to solve it? And he said, look, you're never going to program an answer to this thing. It's just too hard. But you could build a machine that could
And
learn it.
just to pause you, for folks who don't know, what was the Turing test, just to make sure everyone's on the same page?
Yeah, Turing test is the idea of could you distinguish between a machine and a person by having a judge who talks to a person, talks to a machine, and that if they're indistinguishable, you could say that that machine is really intelligent. And so again, you have to be able to not just sort of chit chat. You have to be able to. In his paper, he says, okay, like the judge asks questions about chess, and you have to answer chess questions. And so you realize that language really captures so much of the human experience and so much of what it means to be intelligent. And that I think his that one of my co-founders says that Turing was Turing for a reason. He's truly, truly brilliant. One of his great insights is look, you're going to have to learn an answer. You're going to have to build a machine that can understand how to accomplish tasks we cannot. And that for me was the moment it all clicked. But of course, this was 2008, so nothing worked in AI. And it wasn't for another 7 years that looking from the outside at deep learning and the fact that computers had kind of gotten fast enough that they were now commercially useful, we started to realize that, look, maybe there's actually a shot at this dream. And, I and others came together because we wanted to see if we could steer AI technology in a positive way. We wanted to see if we could actually build the kind of machine Turing had talked about, a human level intelligence, what we call an AGI, and to have that be something that benefits all of humanity. So that's the mission of OpenAI. So we push forward the technology. We want to actually have it be beneficial, have it be safe, and distribute those benefits to everyone. So we've been working on it for 8 years now, I think. And in that time, we keep doing the same activity of we just build a bigger neural network, we make it more capable, we make it more aligned, we make it safer. And over the past couple of years, we've also started to deploy it and make it useful. And that's what I think is so interesting to me about this technology. It's not like fusion where it's you either got it or you don't. It is each step along the way, you can actually have impact and you can actually start benefiting people. And so I think that's good. And, you get to see the benefits of what you've built and actually learn how to mitigate all the downsides. And so I think that's the stage that we're in.
Yeah, there's a bunch in that. I mean, it sounds like based on when you were working on AI stuff, I'm a little over 10 years older, or a little more than that, older than you. But when in the mid late 90s when I was in college, and I was working with some of the early pioneers, and some of them were my professors, and it was the same thing. I was super excited about artificial intelligence. I'd read the science fiction, and I'm like, oh, this is going to take forever if it ever happens. And even your point, you experienced the same about 10, 12 years later. And then even when y'all were thinking about starting OpenAI, this, what you mentioned, AGI, artificial general intelligence, I think many thoughtful people, if I'm honest, even myself, and I tend to run pretty optimistic about things, I would have thought that that's a little bit delusional to actually now start working on take it, not even a research lab. I mean, I guess it's something of a research lab, but to actually start an organization that has did you think that? Were people telling you that? How did you decide to do it anyway?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we got plenty of very, very negative feedback from the community. And the thing that I actually found most interesting was that we were talking about AI safety before it was cool. And in fact, that I remember talking to a candidate who worked at a big AI lab who said, yeah, I think that AGI safety is like the most important problem. I think it really matters. But if you ever quote me on that, I will deny everything. And I think that that is what set us apart, is that we were really willing to think about where it goes and act on it. And we're not alone. Like, there are other people in the field, other pioneers who had been pushing forward this kind of technology and had, sort of been also, I think, very sort of visionary in terms of thinking, even many years ahead of us to get started on this problem. But I think that maybe, I don't know if it's just something in our DNA or if it's something about just kind of for me personally, I felt like I'd spent 5 years building a technology company. I was ready to really sign up for a problem that I was ready to work on for the rest of my life. And it was so clear to me that, like, if I could just make a little dent, even if we're talking like 300 years later and AGI comes along, it'd be worth it, right? And there's a chance that it would be even sooner. And so I think that is kind of the framing, is that the timeline, you can quibble it, you can debate it, you can talk about these things, but fundamentally signing up for the impact for the most important technology that humans will ever create, like, that's something I can get behind.
And what's notable, and I guess this isn't news to a lot of folks because OpenAI has been in the news a lot lately, is, you have these GPT models, these, generative pre-trained transformers, this technology that's, a flavor of neural nets, which have been in the AI community for some time. And y'all had GPT-1, GPT-2. People said, oh, this is interesting. It can write, but it, doesn't really have a good handle on knowledge. GPT-3, even better. And then ChatGPT comes out. It's an interface. It starts to blow people's mind a little bit. And then obviously we announced with y'all, we've been working together on GPT-4, using it in Khan Academy, but y'all have obviously been doing all of the work to develop it. This notion of AGI, artificial general intelligence, does not seem so outlandish anymore. Even some of what I think many folks have gotten GPT-4 to do starts to feel kind of like that. I guess my first question is, what do you think y'all are doing that let y'all get to this place that, there's many folks working in the field, many larger organizations with more resources. Do you think it's something you're doing different, or how you're approaching it, or what do you think is special?
Yeah, I think it's a correct question. I mean, I do think we are part of a much larger trend, right? This like much larger history, right? You look back at all the compute curves for 70 years, we have this exponential growth. And, in like 2000, Ray Kurzweil was saying, hey, just look at the compute. That's going to kind of tell you what's going to be possible. That's the fuel for progress. And everyone thought he was crazy. And now I think they basically think that he's right. And I think that, that you think about the amount of engineering that goes into us being able to deliver something like GPT-4, from the actual compute infrastructure to all of the data sets and tools that we use, that it's really this massive endeavor of humanity in a lot of ways. But kind of specifically, we've managed to execute because we brought together people from a research background and an engineering background. And I think that is something that's very unique, right? And I think that, safety is a core part of that. That kind of comes from all the different angles. It's sort of, both in practice and kind of in theory, thinking about what, how these systems are going to behave, how they're going to go right and go wrong. But yeah, I think that the thing that was so interesting for me when we were starting was looking at all the other labs, and you can really see that they come from typically a research first background. And so you have these research engineers who are told what to do, and the research scientists get to do whatever they want. And you're like, that doesn't seem like how you're going to actually build a working system. It seems like a great way to get a bunch of citations. But if you actually want to have an impact and to develop something, you just need to structure the organization differently. And it's hard. Like, it sounds easy on paper, but I think there's these very conflicting ways of thinking about things. If you come from a very practical background versus if you come from a more academic background, and we somehow have to lean into those. And I think that we've kind of solved more sophisticated versions of this sort of different mindsets, different backgrounds problems, like many times, and you just never fully solve it. You move to a more sophisticated version of it. So I think it's this lean into the discomfort, lean into the hard parts.
No, there's so many questions I have there, because I think there is something unique that y'all must be doing. Y'all aren't that large of an organization, and y'all are definitely, I guess, punching above your weight. But one of the things that you've talked a lot about, and this was even one of the reasons to start OpenAI as a not-for-profit, and we'll talk a little bit about how things have evolved since then. But you keep mentioning safety, and AI is both exciting and maybe even scary to some folks. We've all read the both exciting and the dystopian science fiction. When you talk about safety, what are you talking about? What are the real fears that folks should worry about and put constraints around? And what are the ones that maybe aren't as justified?
Yeah, so I think there's been a long history of AI safety thinking, right? And I think there's some that predates, goes back to the 50s, 60s. You can find people like Arthur C. Clarke talking about this, of having an intelligent machine. And, what sets humans apart is the fact we are intelligent. And so it's something new, right? This whole idea. Um, and so I think we should approach it with equal parts excitement for what can be accomplished and caution for where we could go wrong. So I think that is like fundamentally deeply correct. Have these mixed feelings and to simultaneously be amazed by anything new, but also ask, where is this going, and where is this particular one? Where could the pitfalls be? I think that's the only way we can possibly navigate through the space correctly. But I think that another thing that's been very interesting is how surprising AI seems to be and how it plays out. Like, you think about in the 90s, everyone thought that, oh, if you just solve chess, that will get you to AGI. And actually, chess was kind of the first thing we solved in a lot of ways, and it didn't really go further. And I think I've seen the same on safety thinking, right? That if you think of it as, oh, one thing that could have been built, one direction that I think was possible was that you'd build these agents that have to survive and replicate and evolve in some sort of complicated multi-agent simulation. That sounds really terrifying, right? To even know what those agents are capable of, and to be able to trust them, you have to solve some really hard problems. And so a lot of effort goes into thinking about, how do you design like a reward function that you write down very specifically that has no be careful what you wished for to it. And so there's been a lot of thought that goes into those kinds of ways of solving problems. But the GPT paradigm, kind of, no one saw it coming. It's just totally different from what you'd expect from a safety perspective. And so to me, the lesson really is this: to even know how to put a handle on the technology and to figure out what it could be used for and how to kind of steer it in the right way, that there's not that there's necessarily a limit to foresight, but I think that we have a history of getting overconfident on the wrong things. And so, an example where you can see ahead is if you look at, for example, reinforcement learning from human preferences. And so this is what we use to actually tune the behaviors of these models. And that's something that's very different from, say, GPT-3, where we kind of release the model after just training it on the base data set, to GPT-4, where we're actually able to really tune it and sort of choose the values that the model exhibits. And we actually started developing that technology in 2017, before any of these models existed. And so I think that you can see a little bit ahead into the future. You should think about how they're going to be used, both making sure that they're aligned with what the operator wants, whoever the user is, that they're not sort of misusable if someone wants to do something, but society kind of has decided that that is illegal or is harmful to someone else. There should be some limits. And then also, I think there's ecosystem effects, where it's somehow you can imagine that the AIs, they all do kind of what they're told to do locally, but it somehow adds up to a worse world. And so I think that we're going to have to sort of encounter a increasing series of stakes as time goes on. We've sort of graduated in some ways for the sort of risks of these models. That for GPT-3, I think that we were really worried about misinformation, but when we really came down to it, we saw that people really just wanted to generate, that the most common abuse vector was generating medical advertisements for various drugs. I think that with GPT-4, you have a new sort of class of risks, and I think in the future that you'll have new classes of both benefits and risks that go hand in hand.
So obviously, one of the things that interesting about the two of us talking in our organizations, y'all reached out to us back 6 months ago, when y'all were just starting to get the first version of GPT-4. And I guess one question I have is, why did you reach out to us back then?
Yeah, well, for me personally, I've always felt like one of the motivations for building AI systems, for trying to build AGI, is to get everyone a personal tutor. Like, I think many people have a story of that one teacher who really understood them, who helped them achieve and get excited about a subject. And you just imagine what would happen if everyone had access to such a tutor 24/7, who can really understand them and motivate them. And I feel like that is so aligned with what Khan Academy is building, and the potential that you want to unlock in every student. And so it was just like, when we realized maybe we can actually make a dent in education, maybe this could be applied there, it was so clear that the Khan Academy was the first port of call.
And since then, I guess as we've worked together, and obviously now the GPT-4 is out there, what are you hoping this becomes? Like, how do you how do you hope the education world leverages this? Famously, when ChatGPT came out, it caused a lot of stress in the education world. People were like, oh, kids are going to use this to cheat on their essays or do their homework. How should educators be thinking about this right now?
Yeah, I think that I would say that there's a sort of, education specific version of what I've been saying generally, right? That there's opportunities, there's risks. And I think figuring out how to navigate that is really important. And you have to lean into that tension, right? So that I think it is important that people learn to think for themselves, but I think it's also really important that students can be, sort of get the best out of technology, and that we're making this technology very accessible and available to people who may not be able to get great educational tools otherwise. And so I think that my hope is that we serve as a platform that teachers, educators are able to shape to their liking and to help sort of work with their students and to fill gaps that they can't. And so, I think that the kinds of applications, I'd actually be kind of curious, Sal, what you've been seeing as the ones that you're most excited about.
Yeah, well, obviously we've been putting a lot into this, and we're very excited. We've even demoed, what we're calling Khanmigo, which is essentially the incarnation of the AI on Khan Academy with some large school districts, some of whom have famously banned ChatGPT, and they're giving us the feedback. This is what we wanted. We wanted to harness the powers of this technology, but put some guardrails around it so that it's being used productively for students, so that teachers can kind of see what they're doing, that it's pedagogically sound. Now it is interesting that it has created a really big debate where people are like, well, this is great if they're within the sandbox, but then what's to stop them from going someplace else? And someone else is going to create an application that uses the API to do something, here or there. So I think there are some real questions there. I guess maybe I'll turn that around as a question. How are y'all thinking about this in terms of, is it going to be a little bit like your classic app stores where there's a little bit of editorial review of how folks are using the API, or is it going to be more of like, let's see what happens? How are y'all thinking about this? Well, and I guess you could talk about education generally, or education specifically, or generally.
Yep. Well, I think that the truth is that this technology is very new, and there's a lot to learn, right? But we're very thoughtful about it. We spend a lot of time thinking about exactly how people should build on our platforms, what the rules of engagement should be, trying to get lots of input. So we engage a lot with educators and with other people in various spaces, because I think ultimately the decision of how to integrate this kind of technology into the world, it should not just be up to us. Like we need to be part of that for sure if it's our technology, but we think it's really important to get broad input from everyone. So that's actually one thing that I think is maybe the single most important factor. And so you should expect evolution, right? You should expect us to get data and realize that, hey, like this particular thing played out great, this particular thing did not, and then learn how to adapt. So my hope is that, number one, I think it's really important to really show the upside, right? That I think it's easy to just sort of only see the things that can go wrong. And I think it's important not to stick your head in the sand. But the reason we build this in the first place, right, is to actually realize those benefits. And so what I'm really excited to see is with Khan Academy or anyone else who's going to build in the space, to really engage with like going deep with districts, talking to educators, and really figuring out what the exact shaping is that they want. Once you have a positive example of something working, it's easy to build standards around it, right? If you don't have that at all, then you're just shooting in the dark. And we've seen this already. Last year we published a blog post about safety standards for deploying language models, and all of that came from 2 years worth of deployments and honestly getting a lot wrong. And so I think that this iterative deployment of learning from practice, that is, I think, the single most important thing that we can all be doing right now.
No, I completely agree. Clearly, we're investing so much because we are generally very optimistic about where all of this is going. And, I couldn't speak openly about it when there were all these ChatGPT debates out in the media. But then once we were able to, I was saying, look, I know there has some fears, but if you put it in the right framework with the right guardrails, not only can you mitigate those risks, but you can have massive advances, a tutor for every student, and just introduce completely new modalities that would have seemed like science fiction without AI. Things like interview a historical figure, practice your debate skills. We could go, teachers being able to help creating lesson plans, et cetera, et cetera. One debate that I've been having with a lot of friends lately, knowledgeable friends who know about AI, et cetera. We've been getting into this classical debate about is a tool going to diminish human capability or expand human capability? I'm on the side of expand. So, that's where my cards are, that it's going to make us more creative in some weird way. It might actually make us write more because we're going to be more editors and we're going to be crafting more. But how do you think about that when people say, oh, wow, now people are just going to, one less thing that humans do, they're not going to develop their writing skills. They're not going to develop the creativity because they're just going to lean that much more on artificial intelligence for it.
Yep. I'm definitely with you, Sal. Like, I think that the net effect is going to be extremely positive. That I think that we're all going to get these AI superpowers. We can achieve things we couldn't otherwise. The drudgery will drain away. All of those things I think are here, right? If not on the horizon. But of course, it would be sticking your head in the sand to say that's the only effect, right? I think it's that's the net effect. I think it will be quite strong. But I think that there will be anecdotes of places where it's people who loved a particular craft, and now that craft is commoditized, right? That there was a barrier to entry, you had to build up a skill, and now anyone can do it. And on the one hand, it's a beautiful thing, right? Because there's all these people whose now creativity can be unlocked, right? There's, everyone, I just think about how many people have a smartphone. And so if you're able to get access to everyone who has a smartphone to very powerful AI, and they can start creating in a way that before you'd have to buy a bunch of professional software and you'd have to go to school and get a lot of training. You can see how that world is different, but in a lot of ways it's more positive, on net. But I think this change and being prepared for that, that's a scary thing. And I think that that's something we should kind of go into eyes wide open.
Absolutely. And just in the time we have left, every time I talk to you, you sometimes say, oh, and by the way, Sal, we're also working on this. And then you show me and I'm like, oh, that's a big deal. It's and there's more. Round us out this conversation, just, painting a picture for folks on what is coming, as much as you can talk about it, and what you think are the implications, and how y'all are trying to focus on one of those directions or another.
Yeah, well, look, I think at the most high level, we really are serious about this trajectory to AGI. We think that is the trajectory that society is on, the world is on. I think it's a path that we've been on for a long time. If you look at all of these curves, I think we've picked up the torch in a lot of ways, and we feel it's our chief responsibility to not just build it, but to build it right. And kind of on the short term, I think that you see things like, GPT-4 has vision inputs. That's something that we're still just piloting with one partner. But I think that will also be a new step function in terms of usability, right? You'll be able to present documents. You'll be able to, if you have a diagram that is part of, the educational curriculum on Khan Academy, and that understanding that diagram together with the student's question about it is important, you'll be able to do that. And so I think that we're just going to open up the accessibility in a lot of ways, making this stuff run faster, cheaper, more accessibly. That's always a big focus for us. And really trying to improve, I think the thing that we're missing right now in a lot of ways is being able to generate new ideas, right? Being able to solve harder problems, and all of that we're thinking about, we're exploring, and, again, doing so with our sort of safety first focus.
Yeah. Well, I got to say, Greg, thanks so much for spending the time and bringing us on this journey, because it really feels like we're living in a science fiction book. And it's kind of one of these choose your own adventure science fiction books where it can go in different directions. But I think as long as there's enough people thinking about how we maximize the opportunity and the benefits and mitigate as many risks as possible, I am, and it sounds like you too, we're pretty excited about what the world might be like because of this.
I am too. Yeah, it was great chatting.
Great. Thanks for joining.
Yep. Thank you.